It is 1930, Hong Kong Harbor. A small woman, 5 feet tall, a second-hand suitcase in each hand, steps off a ship into chaos she cannot name yet. She doesn't speak Cantonese. She has no connections in this city. She has exactly enough money for one more train ticket east, into the interior of China, into a country that has been closed to outsiders for decades. She is 28 years old. She is a parlour maid from Edmonton, Alberta, and she is about to do something that career missionaries, trained linguists, and veteran evangelists had declared impossible. Her name is Lillian Brewster, and almost no one has ever heard of her. That is exactly how she would have wanted it. Lillian was born on February 3, 1902, in a farmhouse outside of Lacombe, Alberta, during a January thaw that turned the roads to mud and made the midwife an hour late. Her father, a dry goods merchant who had come west from Ontario, with a trunk full of ambition and a Bible he read every evening by lamp, named her after his own mother. Her mother said the name sounded too long for such a small child and called her Lily from the first day. The name stuck. The Brewster household was not dramatic. It was not the kind of home that produces legends. Her father worked 6 days a week and rested on the 7th with visible relief. Her mother kept a kitchen garden and made preserves every August. There were 3 brothers, all older, all more interested in hockey than in church, though they attended every Sunday, because not attending was not a conversation anyone wanted to have with their father. Lily sat between them in the pew, her feet not quite reaching the floor until she was 9 years old. She was quiet, not shy. There is a difference, and her family understood it. She was quiet the way deep water is quiet, still on the surface, moving underneath in ways you cannot track. She read everything she could reach. She asked questions her Sunday school teachers found inconvenient. At 14, she told her mother she thought she was supposed to go to China. Her mother poured more tea and said that was a very long way and perhaps she should finish the 8th grade first. But the thing about Lily Brewster was that she never forgot a thought that mattered. She filed it away. She kept it. At 16, she went to work in the home of a wealthy family in Edmonton, doing laundry and cooking and childcare. She sent most of her wages home. She attended a small Pentecostal mission on Friday evenings, not because it was expected of her, but because something happened in that plain room on Jasper Avenue that she could not find anywhere else. The singing was unpolished. The preaching was earnest in ways that sometimes embarrassed her. But there was a presence there she could not explain to anyone who hadn't felt it. And in that presence, China surfaced again and again like something that would not stay submerged. At 22, she wrote a letter to the China Inland Mission in Toronto. They wrote back. They were sorry, but the minimum educational requirement was completion of Bible school. They recommended she enroll in a 2-year program and reapply. She enrolled. She completed the 2 years. She reapplied. They were sorry again. The interior of China was too dangerous for single women. They had very recently had to evacuate 3 missionaries from Henan province due to political instability. Perhaps she would consider home missions? There was meaningful work to be done in northern Alberta. Lily sat with that letter for 3 days. Then she set it aside. She applied to a 2nd mission board. Rejected. A 3rd. Rejected. A 4th told her they might have an opening in Japan if she was willing to be flexible. She told them politely that she was not called to Japan. She was called to China. By her 27th birthday, she had been refused 5 times. She had no sponsoring organization, no supporting church with a large endowment, and no plan that any reasonable person could call a plan. She had a name, a woman named Martha Schofield who ran an independent mission guesthouse in Yangcheng, in Shanxi province, who had reportedly written to several mission boards looking for a helper. She had a name, and she had enough money saved for passage to Hong Kong and 1 train fare east. She also had something harder to quantify. She had been paying a price in secret for 9 years. Not the romantic price of dramatic sacrifice. The invisible price. Getting up at 4 in the morning to pray before the household woke. Studying Mandarin from a grammar book borrowed from the Edmonton Public Library. Practicing tones alone in her room after the family had gone to bed. Sounding ridiculous to herself, persisting anyway. Fasting 1 day a week, even when she was working physically demanding hours and could not afford to be weak. reading the Gospels through again and again until the words stopped feeling like words and started feeling like instructions. No one knew she was doing any of this. No one was watching. That is the part that never gets told. The decade before anyone is paying attention. The part that happens in borrowed rooms and second-hand books and silent conversations with God that no one else is in the room for. The price Gordon Lindsay paid in the prayer closet at 4 in the morning was the same price Lily Brewster was paying on a different continent in a different decade, the same currency, the same exchange. She bought her ticket in the spring of 1930 and boarded a ship at Vancouver. Martha Schofield was 67 years old when Lily Brewster arrived at her door in Yangcheng. She was English, angular, completely unbothered by discomfort, and had been running her guest house and small dispensary for 23 years with the help of exactly no organization and a great deal of what she called common sense, which in practice looked to outside observers more like audacity. She had 2 mules, a courtyard, and a room she let out to visiting merchants along the Inn Road, an ancient trade route that still carried travelers between the north and south of Shanxi province. She looked at Lily for a long moment when she arrived. "You're smaller than I expected," Martha said. "I'm told that often," Lily said. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you sleep on a brick platform?" "I don't know. I've never tried." Martha nodded as if that was the right answer. "Come in then." Lily spent her first months doing what she had done in Edmonton: cooking, cleaning, assisting, watching, learning. Martha ran her dispensary with a combination of basic medical knowledge and something that people in Yangcheng could only describe as blessing. Merchants stopped. Travelers rested. Sick people came, some of them carried on the backs of relatives who had walked 2 days from villages in the mountains. Martha treated what she could. She prayed over what she couldn't. She charged nothing. She asked for nothing in return except that people listen to what she told them about the God who had brought her here from the other side of the world. Lily watched all of this. She watched how Martha talked to the mule drivers without condescension. She watched how she held the hand of a mother whose child had died of fever in the night. She watched how Martha could be simultaneously practical, haggling over the price of rice, arguing with the local magistrate about road access, and completely surrendered. Not surrendered in a defeated sense. Surrendered in the sense of a river that has found its course. She filed all of it away. She kept it. After 18 months, Martha Schofield died in her sleep. She was 69 years old. She left the guest house, the mules, the dispensary, and a courtyard full of people who did not know what would happen to them now, to a 29-year-old woman from Lacombe, Alberta, who had not been in China for 2 years and was still making grammatical errors in Mandarin that made children cover their mouths to hide their laughter. Lily buried Martha in the courtyard. She stood over the grave for a long time. Then she went inside and made breakfast. That is not a metaphor. She literally made breakfast because there were 6 travelers staying in the guest house and they needed to eat. But it is also not a metaphor. The willingness to do the next practical thing even when the ground has shifted beneath you. That is not a small quality. Most people freeze. Most people wait for someone to tell them what to do next. Lily Brewster made breakfast, and then she went to the magistrate's office to arrange the continuing lease on the property. And then she opened the dispensary. And then she sat in the courtyard in the evening and asked God what she was supposed to do with the rest of her life. The answer she felt she received was simple and unreasonable. Stay. She stayed. The Inn Road had carried travelers for over 1,000 years, and with them it carried everything: goods, news, disease, rumor, and occasionally people who were running from things they couldn't outrun. Lily learned to read the road. She learned which merchants were trustworthy. She learned which officials could be reasoned with, and which ones needed to be prayed about instead. She learned which mountain dialects she needed a smattering of to make people feel seen. She learned how to set a broken bone, how to treat dysentery, how to identify the early signs of the eye disease that blinded so many children in the villages she was beginning to visit. She began making trips into the mountains, at first accompanied by a local woman named Xiao Ming, who agreed to come partly out of curiosity and partly because her own mother had been healed of a fever at the Brewster dispensary, as people had begun to call it. Then, as her Mandarin improved, and her knowledge of the region deepened, sometimes alone. She would walk into a village, set up in whatever space was offered to her, a courtyard, a temple entrance, occasionally the front room of a home, and spend 3 or 4 days treating people, telling stories from the Gospels, answering questions, praying for those who asked. The healings began without announcement. She didn't talk about them freely. This is important to understand. Lily Brewster was deeply suspicious of her own story. She was suspicious of the human tendency to embroider, to make a good story better, to let wonder slide into exaggeration and exaggeration slide into fabrication. She had seen it happen to Martha. She had watched how quickly a genuine moment of grace could be turned, by the retelling, into something closer to theater. So she was careful. When something happened that she could not explain, when a woman who had not walked in 2 years rose from the brick bed in a mountain village and walked across the courtyard, when a child with advanced pneumonia began breathing normally in the night after Lily had prayed over him in a way that felt, to her, like simply being a conduit for something much larger than herself. She wrote it down. Date, location, name of person, witnesses present, what was observable, what she could not account for. She was doing what Gordon Lindsay would do with Branham's ministry on the other side of the world at roughly the same time. She was documenting. She was protecting the truth of it by refusing to inflate it. But the word spread anyway, because truth like that does not stay in a notebook. By the mid-1930s, the guest house at Yangcheng had become something no mission board had planned, and no committee had approved. People came from 50 miles away. Not merchants, not travelers. People who had heard something was happening on the Yin Road in Shanxi province, in the home of a foreign woman called Ai Ling by the locals, which meant something close to beloved grace in a loose translation that Lily herself thought was embarrassingly grand. She did not feel like beloved grace. She felt like a woman who was chronically behind on correspondence and frequently uncertain and occasionally so exhausted she fell asleep while praying. But she did not stop. Then came the year that broke everything. The Japanese Imperial Army moved into Shanxi province. Lily had known it was coming. She had watched the horizon for 2 years, listening to reports from merchants who came through the Inn Road, looking shaken in ways they could not articulate. She had made a practical decision. She was not leaving. She had a dispensary. She had a community that depended on it. She had a life that had taken 8 years to build in this particular soil, and she did not believe God had brought her here to leave when things became difficult. What she had not accounted for was the children. There were 94 of them. They had been gathering at the guest house for years. Orphans, abandoned children. Children whose parents had sent them ahead with a merchant or a relative or a stranger because the villages were not safe. Children who had simply arrived in the courtyard one morning and not left because no one came to collect them. Lily had fed them. She had schooled them. She had arranged sleeping arrangements with the inventive desperation of someone who has never had enough space but refuses to acknowledge the limitation. She had not planned to have 94 children. No one plans that. It simply accumulates, one child at a time, each one a decision that seemed obvious in the moment. When the Japanese advance made Yangcheng untenable, a local official came to her. He told her she had to go. She told him she couldn't leave the children. He told her she had to take them. She looked at him for a long moment. Take them where? There is a refugee settlement, he said, in Xi'an, beyond the mountains. How far? He hesitated. 12 days' walk, he said, over the mountains, in good conditions. These were not good conditions. It was early spring and the mountain passes were still cold. She had 94 children ranging in age from 4 to 15. She had no military escort, no logistical support, no map she fully trusted. She had the same 2 mules she had inherited from Martha Schofield 8 years before. She thought about it for one night. Then she packed what she could carry, told the children to pack what they could carry, put the 4-year-olds on the mules, and walked out of Yangcheng at dawn on a morning in late March. What followed is the kind of story that becomes legend so quickly the actual truth of it can get buried under the telling. So here is the actual truth, as carefully documented as Lily herself tried to document everything. The journey took 15 days, not 12. Several of the older children carried the smaller ones on their backs across the highest passes. Lily herself contracted fever on day 9 and was carried on a makeshift stretcher for one day by 2 of the 15-year-old boys, before she insisted on walking again. They ran out of food on day 11. They survived on what they could forage and on the generosity of villages they passed through, some of which gave what they could not really spare, which is the kind of generosity that is genuinely hard to look at directly. None of the children died, not one. When they came down out of the mountains and the road to Sian opened before them, Lily Brewster sat down on a rock by the side of the road and could not immediately get up again. One of the youngest children, a girl of about 5 whose name was Pei Pei, and who had been carried most of the way and therefore had more energy than anyone else, climbed into Lily's lap. Lily held her. That is all. She just held her. The official accounts would later call it a miracle of logistics and endurance. Church reports would call it an act of faith. Both are true and neither one quite reaches it. What it was, underneath all of those descriptions, was the product of 15 years of invisible preparation. The woman who could walk 15 days through the mountains with 94 children had been built, slowly and without drama, in the prayer closet and the dispensary and the mountain villages of Shanxi province, in the long years before anyone was watching. The refugee settlement in Xi'an was not the end. Lily was 36 years old when she arrived. She was ill. The fever that had struck on the mountain road had damaged something in her, a stress fracture in her health that would not fully heal for years. She was debriefed by mission officials who had heard garbled reports of what had happened and wanted to make sense of it. She was offered passage home to Canada. She was told that she had done something remarkable, and that no one would think less of her for resting. She asked if the children had been settled. They had. She asked if there was still work to be done in Shanxi province, when conditions permitted. She said she would rest. Then she rested for 1 year. She recovered enough. She went back, not to Yangcheng, that was not possible for a long time, but to the work, to the training of local women who could run dispensaries in mountain villages without any foreign presence at all, to the writing of simple medical guides in Mandarin that could be reproduced and distributed without any sophisticated equipment, to the quiet, systematic work of building something that did not depend on her. This is the part that most people miss when they tell her story. The mountain journey is the dramatic peak, the moment that becomes a film and a book and a legend. But the years after the mountain, the unglamorous years of training other people, writing guides, building structures that would outlast her, that is where the deeper work happened. She had learned it from Martha. Build with integrity. Don't build around one personality. Create what continues. She had learned it, in the language of her own faith, from the gospel accounts she had read so many hundreds of times that she no longer read them so much as listened to them. The teacher trains disciples. The disciples go out. The kingdom doesn't depend on the teacher staying visible. By the 1950s, when the political situation made any foreign presence in the Chinese interior impossible, Lily Brewster returned to Canada for the first time in 23 years. She was 51 years old. She arrived in Edmonton on a gray November afternoon and stood in the train station for a few minutes, disoriented by the scale of it, the light, the noise, the English everywhere, the way people moved through space with so much room. Her brother Harold met her on the platform. He had aged, which was reasonable, as she supposed she had too. He took her suitcase. He looked at her for a moment. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I'm all right." She meant it, which is itself a kind of miracle. She did not retire. She was not built for retirement. She spent the next 2 decades traveling across Canada and into the United States and eventually to Southeast Asia and Africa, teaching. Not preaching exactly, though there were those who would have called it that. Teaching, training, answering questions, sitting with people who were in the middle of the wilderness years, the hidden years, and telling them, in the particular way that only someone who has actually been through it can tell you, that the wilderness years are not wasted years, that the price you pay in secret is not paid into nothing, that the prayer closet at 4 in the morning is not a performance for an empty room. She knew something about that from the inside. She was asked to write her memoir 3 times. She declined twice. The third time, a woman who ran a small Christian publishing house in Toronto came to see her in person, which Lily considered more serious than a letter. She sat in Lily's kitchen in the house in Lacombe. She had come back to Lacombe, eventually to the same county where she was born, and made her case. Lily listened carefully. Then she said, "The danger with memoirs is that people read them and think the interesting part is the person. The interesting part is never the person." "What is it then?" the publisher asked. Lily thought about this. "The faithfulness," she said. "The long faithfulness. Before anyone is watching." She wrote the memoir. It sold modestly. It was not a bestseller. It was passed from hand to hand in small mission circles and Bible school common rooms and sent, occasionally, to prison libraries. People wrote to her about it in letters that took months to arrive and described the kind of reading experience that changes how someone understands their own life. She answered every letter by hand. Lillian Doris Brewster died on April 14, 1981, in the Lacombe Hospital where she had been born 79 years before. She died, according to the nurse who was with her, in the early morning quietly with no particular drama. Her brother Harold's daughter was with her, holding her hand. The community of local women she had trained in Shanxi province were still working, some of them, the oldest ones, now training others. The medical guides she had written in Mandarin had been revised and reprinted multiple times by people she had never met. The children who had walked over the mountain with her, the ones who had survived and grown up, had become teachers, doctors, parents, and one of them, Pei, the small girl who had climbed into her lap on the road to Sion, had spent her adult life running a small school for orphaned children in Taiwan. The multiplication had happened without Lily being present for most of it. That is the nature of the work she chose. You build something that walks away from you and keeps going. She paid the price in the hidden years, in the cold mornings, and the borrowed grammar books, and the mountain villages where no one was watching. She documented truth and refused to inflate it, even when inflation would have been more impressive. She trained others and stepped back. She died worn out at 79, and what she had set in motion was still, on the morning of April 14, 1981, quietly, without drama continuing. You have never heard of Lillian Brewster. Almost no one has. That is exactly how she would have wanted it. But God keeps accounts, and in those accounts, the name of a parlour maid from Lacombe, Alberta, who bought a train ticket east with no sponsoring organization and a borrowed grammar book and a decade of secret prayer, is written with the permanence of something that mattered. Something that still matters. Something that is still, in classrooms and clinics and kitchens in places she never visited, bearing fruit. The question her life asks is not complicated. It is simply this: what are you building in the years before anyone is watching? What price are you willing to pay in the hidden place for the sake of something that will walk away from you and keep going long after you are gone? Lillian Brewster answered that question with her life. The rest of us are still deciding.